Imagine walking through the desert, minding your own business, when suddenly you see a bush on fire. But here's the twist. It's not burning up. The flames are roaring, but the branches are perfectly fine. And then you hear a voice calling your name from inside the fire. What would you do? Run? Freeze? Or answer? Today, we're diving into one of the most mind-blowing encounters in the Bible, Moses and the burning bush. And trust me, it's more than just a cool Sunday school story. It's about fear, purpose, and what happens when God shows up in the middle of your ordinary day. Hey there, welcome to The Overcomer, where we uncover Bible stories that are not just fascinating but life-changing. If you love discovering hidden gems in Scripture that make you think, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. All right, let's set the scene. Moses isn't some superhero at this point. He's not parting seas or leading crowds. He's a shepherd in the middle of nowhere, literally, the wilderness near Mount Horeb. He's been living in exile for 40 years after fleeing Egypt because, well, he murdered someone. So yeah, not exactly the poster child for most likely to be chosen by God. But here's where it gets interesting. Moses is just doing his daily routine, tending to his father-in-law's sheep, when he sees something bizarre, a bush engulfed in flames, yet untouched by fire. He turns to get a closer look, and that's when God calls his name. Moses, Moses. Now let's pause for a second. Imagine being in his shoes. He's alone in the wilderness, miles from civilization, when suddenly a supernatural event unfolds right in front of him. A logical reaction might be to run for the hills. But Moses stays. He answers, "Here I am." And then comes the game changer. God tells him to remove his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. The same ground he probably walked on every day had now become a sacred place. Why? Because God showed up. This moment isn't just about a fiery bush. It's about God meeting someone where they are, in the middle of their everyday life, and calling them to something greater. And that's exactly what he does with us. Stay tuned, because we're about to break down how this encounter changed Moses forever, and how it can change you too. Moses notices this bush that's on fire but not burning up. That's odd enough to make him stop. And as he steps closer, a voice calls out, "Moses, Moses." And Moses, probably more confused than afraid at first, answers, "Here I am." Now, let's pause. This small moment, Moses saying, "Here I am," shows something powerful. He's available. He's curious. Sometimes God doesn't need us to be perfect. He just needs us to be present. Then God drops the bombshell. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Why the sandals? In ancient times, removing your shoes was a sign of respect and humility. It's like walking into someone's house and realizing this isn't just any living room. It's sacred space. But it doesn't stop there. God says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Boom. Moses realizes this isn't just a random desert phenomenon. He's in the presence of the Almighty. And what does he do? He hides his face because he's afraid to look at God. Wouldn't you? Now comes the mission. "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." And Moses is like, Me? Are you sure about that, God?" He makes every excuse in the book. "Who am I to do this? What if they don't believe me? I'm not a good speaker." Sound familiar? Ever felt like you weren't good enough for something big? Moses did too. But here's the key. God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. God answers Moses' fears with one simple, powerful promise. "I will be with you." That's it. No detailed plan, no guarantees of smooth sailing, just his presence. And that's something we often forget. We want all the details, all the guarantees, all the signs that everything will be smooth. But God simply says, "I will be with you." and that's enough. Here's a cool bonus fact. Did you know that the burning bush is often seen as a symbol of God's presence that doesn't consume us? The bush burns but isn't destroyed. Just like how God's presence can be overwhelming and powerful, yet it doesn't destroy us. In fact, it purifies us. Think about that for a second. How many times do we avoid God's calling because we're afraid of what it might cost us? But what if the very thing we fear is actually meant to refine us, not destroy us? Let's talk about Moses' excuses for a moment, because honestly, we all make them. Excuse number 1. Who am I? Moses basically says, I'm a nobody. But God doesn't respond with a pep talk about Moses' abilities. Instead, he says, I will be with you. It's not about who Moses is, it's about who God is. Excuse number 2. What if they don't believe me? Moses is worried about credibility, so God gives him signs: a staff turning into a snake, a leper's hand made clean, water turning to blood. God equips him with what he needs, just like he equips us when he calls us. Excuse number 3. I'm not a good speaker. Moses stutters. He's not eloquent, and he thinks that disqualifies him. But God reminds him, who gave human beings their mouths? Now go. I will help you speak. But even after all that, Moses still says, please send someone else. And God, though patient, finally says, all right, fine. Aaron will go with you. Moses wasn't chosen because he was the best option. He was chosen because he was willing, eventually. So, what does this mean for us? 1. God meets us where we are. Moses was in the wilderness, doing his everyday work, when God showed up. Sometimes we think we have to be in a perfect spiritual place for God to use us. But no, he meets us in the middle of our ordinary lives. 2. God doesn't expect us to have it all together. Moses had baggage, a murder, a stutter, a whole lot of self-doubt. But God still called him. Your past doesn't disqualify you from your purpose. 3. God's presence is the only guarantee we need. We want a roadmap. We want certainty. But all God promises is himself. And that's enough. So, let me ask you, if God showed up in your life today, calling you to something bigger than yourself, would you say yes? Or would you make excuses? Maybe your burning bush moment isn't as dramatic as Moses. Maybe it's a conversation, a conviction, a door opening that you weren't expecting. Will you step forward or shrink back? Thanks for hanging out with me today as we explored Moses' encounter with the burning bush. I hope it made you think. Maybe the ordinary dry deserts of life are where God shows up in the most unexpected ways. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share it with a friend who needs a little inspiration today. And hey, I'd love to hear from you. Here's a question to ponder. If God spoke to you today, like he did to Moses, would you listen or would you make excuses? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Until next time, keep overcoming.